Lawrence Kohlberg presented children and adults with moral dilemmas. Should a man steal an unaffordable drug to save his dying wife? And discovered that people's reasoning about right and wrong develops through a remarkably consistent sequence of stages. But when Carol Gilligan, Kohlberg's own former student, examined his research more closely, she found something troubling. The theory had been built almost entirely on male participants, and it seemed to systematically score women's moral reasoning as less developed. Lawrence Kohlberg proposed a six-stage theory of moral development organized into three broader levels. The pre-conventional level, typical of young children, is organized around avoiding punishment and pursuing self-interested rewards. The conventional level, typical of adolescents and most adults, is organized around maintaining social approval and upholding laws and social order for their own sake. The post-conventional level, achieved by only some adults, is organized around self-chosen, abstract ethical principles that may sometimes require questioning or transcending existing laws and social conventions when they conflict with more fundamental justice. Kohlberg's methodology centered on presenting participants with hypothetical moral dilemmas, most famously the Heinz dilemma, asking whether a man should steal an unaffordable drug to save his dying wife, then analyzing the structure and reasoning behind participants' judgments rather than merely whether they answered yes or no. A person could reach either conclusion at any stage. What determined stage classification was the type of reasoning used to justify the answer, such as reasoning based on fear of punishment versus reasoning based on abstract principles of the sanctity of human life. Carol Gilligan's influential critique noted that Kohlberg's foundational longitudinal research was conducted almost entirely with male participants, yet the resulting stage theory was presented as a universal, gender-neutral model of moral development applicable to everyone. Gilligan argued this methodological choice embedded a particular, culturally masculine conception of morality, emphasizing abstract justice, individual rights, and impartial rule-based reasoning as the theoretical standard against which all moral reasoning, including women's, would subsequently be measured and, in some early studies, found comparatively deficient. Gilligan proposed that alongside Kohlberg's justice-oriented moral reasoning, an equally legitimate and sophisticated alternative moral orientation exists, an ethics of care, emphasizing relationships, responsibility to specific others, contextual sensitivity to particular circumstances, and concern for maintaining connection and preventing harm, rather than abstract, impartial application of universal rules. Gilligan argued this care-based orientation was more commonly, though not exclusively, expressed by women in her research, and that Kohlberg's scoring system had systematically failed to recognize it as a genuinely mature form of moral reasoning in its own right. Subsequent large-scale meta-analyses examining Kohlberg-style moral reasoning across many studies have generally found only small and inconsistent gender differences in overall stage scores, considerably smaller than the systematic gap Gilligan's critique initially implied. Though some studies do find that men and women somewhat differ in their relative emphasis on justice versus care orientations when reasoning through the same moral dilemmas. This suggests Gilligan's core theoretical contribution, that care-based reasoning represents a genuine, undervalued moral orientation, may be more empirically important than her specific claim about a large, systematic gender gap in Kohlberg's original scoring. Contemporary moral psychology has moved beyond framing justice-based and care-based moral reasoning as competing, gender-linked frameworks, instead treating both orientations as complementary components available to and used by both men and women, depending on the specific relational and situational context of a given moral dilemma. This integrative shift reflects Gilligan's lasting contribution to the field, expanding the very definition of mature moral reasoning to include relational, contextual, and care-based considerations alongside Kohlberg's original emphasis on abstract justice and universal principle. Kohlberg's stage theory and Gilligan's care-based critique together offer a richer picture of moral development than either framework alone, one emphasizing abstract justice and universal principle, the other emphasizing relationship, context, and responsibility to specific others. Modern moral psychology increasingly recognizes both as legitimate, mature expressions of ethical reasoning.